We see that. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Solidarity session number 30, where we'll be looking at an agrarian trust in Australia, the potential of that happening. I'll just start with an acknowledgement of country. Just one second. Just trying to work out my screen here. Oh, there we go. That's better. Okay. So I would like to acknowledge the Walbunja and Brinja Yuin people of the Yuin Nation. I'm currently on Brinja Yuin land, which is the south of the Maria River, but my farm is north of the river, which is on Walbunja country. So I'd like to acknowledge them, of the Yuin Nation, who hold deep knowledge and ancient connection to the country I farm and live on. I give my thanks and respects to the true custodians of these unceded lands and waterways for sustainably managing them before me today and into the future. And I'd just like to ask everybody who's here just to put down in the chat what country they are coming from, where you're joining us. It's a pleasure to see you all, and I'm so excited that you've all turned up to have a discussion about it's something that's kind of gaining a lot of momentum I've found recently in just a lot of conversations that I've been having, either farm related or not. So yeah, it should be a really great conversation just to start some light bulbs happening with us all to look at some alternative ways of looking at land. A couple of housekeeping, just make sure that your mic is turned off so we don't have any background noise going on. And if you'd like to say something, you can raise your hand. There's the button that you can use there, or if you can put it in the chat too, and I'll get Jess, the lovely AFSA General Coordinator, to let me know that that's happening so I don't miss anything. And yeah, we'll get straight into it. So what are we going to talk about tonight? So we're going to look at what exactly an agrarian trust model is. We're going to look at why an agrarian trust would be beneficial in Australia, and also what needs to be considered about setting up a model of this kind in this Australian context that we find ourselves in. We'll look at some examples of successful agrarian trusts from around the world and what we can aim to achieve in each region of Australia as well. So lots to talk about. Just a brief kind of overall intro about why we're here tonight. So as we know, access to land and tenure remains to be one of the biggest barriers to ethical and ecologically sound. Oh, Jess, you want to say something?
Yeah, just quickly, I don't know if it's the same for everyone else, but I can't see your slides.
Oh,
I can't see them either.
Yeah.
Weird. Hang on. Oh, there we go. Is that better?
No, still can't see them.
This is loading for me.
Yeah.
It says my screen is paused. Hang on. Resume share. Let's go again. Sorry.
There we go.
There we go. Got it.
Yeah.
When did that? Anyway, so you all can see it now. Thank you, Jeff. Somebody's background tunes are happening. If we could just make sure that, yeah, your mic's turned off. Okay, so back to it. Thanks for that, Jess. So just a bit of background knowledge. So access to land and tenure remains one of the biggest barriers to ethical and ecologically sound and equitable food production here in Australia. So agrarian trusts have been established in other countries like the US and the UK as an alternative land ownership model that takes the power back from private entities and then transforms that land into commons. So what this model does, and what's so, I guess, attractive about it, is that it offers a vastly different kind of perspective about viewing land that we have been subjected to as a result of things like colonialism and capitalism, and has been gaining, as I said before, a lot of momentum in conversations in the agroecological space. So why we're here tonight is that AFSA has been taking inspiration. So AFSA is Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance that I'm on the national committee for. So we're taking inspiration from an existing agrarian trust landholding and use model developed in the US to start talking about the potential of what this type of model could look like in the Australian legislative context. So there's like a link here, but there'll be another slide at the end of useful links and resources that you guys can use in your I guess future research when you're after this conversation. So what I thought we could do is first is get some introductions of the people that are working in this working group that have been that's been designing what this kind of model could look like. It's early days, but there's some amazing people on this working group. And so I'd like to just kind of pass through some people. So I'll direct it to Michelle. If you just want to tell us who you are, where you are, and what you do in this, I guess, working group space, that would be awesome.
Hi everyone. And I work part-time as a lawyer here in a small firm in Balnarring, and the other part of my week has been, until recently, working on private land conservation projects under contracts to my local land care network. So basically working with landholders to preserve and extend native bush on their property. And so I've been thinking about the issue of land access for farmers for a long time, because I have a grad dip in sustainable agriculture and it's just one of my interests. So when I finished up my 7-year contracts with the Land Care Network, I was thinking I'd really like to work on this project, and I had heard about the Agrarian Trust model. So I looked into it, and then I basically started approaching groups that I thought might be interested in being co-applicants on a grant to get money to get a legal firm to have a look to see whether this model will work in Australia, given our charity laws, tax laws, property laws. And that led me to the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance, who ended up, that you guys have been looking at this for a while. And so, working group was formed, and I'm currently working on, I've just finished a first, what I call a use case, which is basically taking an existing group of people who have been interested in the idea of a land trust and trying to fit the Agrarian Trust model to their circumstances. And the group is Graham Stockton's here. He's the head of that group, the Surf Coast Energy Group, who are looking at some land just out of Torquay for various reasons. They've been thinking about getting that land into a trust model for a while. So, yeah.
Thanks, Michelle. So maybe we'll go to Graham then.
Thanks, Michelle. I think I'll try to be fairly brief. I think the whole idea for us around community land purchase in Spring Creek Valley is based on systems thinking and community development, not just a land care project. So that it involves food, but it also involves biodiversity and looking at the strengths of the Surf Coast, which is, ecotourism, and looking at a particular area of land that is geographically very significant, as well as supporting an important ecology, and building on that and trying to create an alternative model, which could include the Agrarian Trust stuff within it, particularly as all the land up the Spring Creek Valley is privately owned.
Yeah. Great.
I think that's all I need to put in at the moment.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Tessa.
Hi everyone. I'm Tess and I'm on Judge Wurrung Country in Victoria, and I run a small little dairy on a farm in Harcourt, which is owned by Katie, she's also on the group. And we're the Harcourt Organic Farming Co-op. So I guess I'm already farming on leased land, but my real excitement about the Agrarian Trust is just the idea that I'll never be able to buy land off what I can earn from dairy in the current real estate market. And I think that's the case for most people coming into agriculture. And so the Agrarian Trust, I'm really excited about the idea of kind of pulling that land out of the normal real estate market and having it accessible forever for farmers to farm with security, without having to be able to buy it off their back themselves. So that's probably where I'm really excited about this model.
Yeah, that excites me the most about it too, actually, I think. Katie, do you want to add anything to that?
Hi everyone, I'm Katie. Yeah, we're the landowners that own the farm where Tess is farming, and the co-op model that we've set up has got a limited lifespan, and so of 9 years. And so we're like 5 years into it, and we're all really curious about what we're going to do next. So this is one sort of possibility, and yeah, has got lots of exciting aspects, and you know, a few drawbacks as well potentially, but it's there. Like, everyone's talking about how we can do collaborative farming in the long term and give farmers security, and this is the best sort of model that's popped up so far that looks actually possible. So I'm pretty excited about it too.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Amy?
Hi everyone. I am here in Sydney on Gadigal country. I'm a lawyer and a law professor based in between Temple University in the US and Philadelphia and UNSW here. And I'm a member of the advisory board for AFSA's Legal Defense Fund. I do a range of teaching and writing on alternative food networks and food supply chains, with a focus often in India, but just really, I just was thrilled when this conversation around agrarian trusts and commons-based land holding sort of came our way, and I'm grateful to be part of the conversations and collective thinking.
Thanks, Amy. Bronwyn?
Hi everyone. I am also an academic lawyer and based as Professor of Law at the University of New South Wales, and I guess I've written quite a bit on not agrarian trust forms as such, but on legal forms for different forms of social enterprise and community enterprise, usually more in an urban setting. But I've also been a part of the Community Economies Research Network. I'm also on the same advisory legal defense group for AFSA as Amy, and both of us have been part of the Community Economies Research Network, which has spent a lot of time looking, particularly Louise Crabtree's part of that network, and she's been at some of our meetings, and she does a lot of work on community land trusts in Australia. So I've been sort of part of those conversations for a while, and yes, for the same reasons that everybody else is excited. I love what I like to call institutional imagination, and this is a fantastic example of it, and hopefully we can develop it.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Have I missed anyone? Speak now if I have, because there's a few others that aren't here tonight that are on the working group. Okay, I can't see anyone, but if there is, just speak and we'll hear from you. So I'm going to now, I'll mention what I do. So I am a market gardener on Walbunja country in Maruya, and I farm on leased land. So alternative, just like Tessa, like the idea of being able to acquire land based on what they're priced at right now is, I just don't ever really see it happening. So these alternative kind of like land acquisition models for me, yeah, it's hopeful, I guess, for people that are trying to get into this world. I just find it a really hopeful thing in a space where sometimes things don't seem that hopeful. So that's why this really excites me. Okay, so now for the info dump, and apologies in advance for this. I'm just still trying to wrap my head around it, and Michelle created this amazing document, which was a briefing before the first kind of meeting, before the working group got together, just kind of giving a really succinct rundown about what the Agrarian Trust model looks like and what it involves. So yeah, I've put all of those bullet points on this slide so that I don't forget anything. So I apologize if it makes you zone out, but yeah, I don't want to miss anything. Okay, so the agrarian trust model is a model of landholding and use developed in the US in 2020, and it prioritizes these things. So ecological restorative agriculture, it prioritizes community building, land access and land justice for next generation farmers, and the preservation of localized food systems. So the model works as follows. I'm just going to move my thing. I don't know how to move this out of the way. Sorry, one sec. There we go. Okay, so the model works as follows. A national not-profit or a charity, which is called the Agrarian Trust, it acquires land through land donations and fundraising. The Agrarian Trust, or the trust as it's known, conveys the land via deed or gives title to regional non-profits who are also charities, and these are called the Agrarian Commons or the Commons. Some of the commons are statewide and some are within a region in a state. Other commons are mission or purpose aligned and do not have a geographic limit. Each common starts with 1 to 3 farms and then can grow to hold between 4 to 12 per commons, which is capped. Each commons is governed locally, and we'll go into the board composition of this a little bit later. Each commons conveys long-term leases to farmers, which is, I think, a really valuable and important factor of this model. The commons may also set aside portions of the properties as conservation easements. So Michelle gave an example of this in Victoria, where it could be a trust for nature covenant or conserve sections of the land for conservation projects. For example, biolinks, which is another really awesome facet of it. So then when we're talking about leases, so the leases set conditions on the kind of farming that can be done. So whether that be regenerative or chemical free, and the leases are then transferable by the leaseholder. They can be on-sold, but only on the same conditions of that original lease. So I feel like that is a really important thing in terms of preserving the way that the farmers farm. In terms of an ecological sense. So then the leases often allow the farmers to build equity, i.e. the farmers can install infrastructure and buildings, and the leases have mechanisms built in to compensate outgoing farmers for the value of that infrastructure. However, in some cases, the commons owns the buildings, for example, if they were built with agrarian trust funds. The leaseholders operate independently, still on the terms of the lease, but running their own farm businesses and making decisions about how they want to run their businesses. Really important. The leaseholders can run a wide range of enterprises as long as they conform to those those initial lease conditions that were set up. So this could include CSAs or incubator farms, subsistence farms, for profit or non-profit cooperatives. So the idea here is that the farmers maintain their own autonomy within this kind of structure. Yeah, so we're going into the finances here. The lease payments are made by the farmers to the commons, and these payments assist the commons to sustain itself, i.e. cover single staff person or roll the lease revenue back into the farm to invest in things like infrastructure or conservation and soil building practices. Let me just have a look at the chat. 1 second. Oh yeah, Jessie just put a link in. So this I find is a really awesome component of the model. This next one, it's the lease rates are not market-based and are not based on servicing debt acquired through the acquisition of the farm at a market-based sale price. So the lease rate is dependent on what the farmer's business can afford. The lease rate can grow as the farm business grows and can also take into account sweat equity. It is intended to be case specific and reflect what is equitable and fair for the specific farmer. These decisions are made by the Commons. I think this is a really important component because we know that initially getting into farming, there's a lot of investments that need to happen, and those kind of first initial years of small scale farming aren't the most financially lucrative. So it kind of allows farmers to start on the front foot and then like work towards being able to pay a little bit more towards the kind of functioning of as a whole of the model, which I find this component just giving that access really to aspiring farmers, making it seem possible and not so scary. Okay, so then when we're talking about the board composition, so this is the way that this particular model is structured. So there's 1/3 of leaseholding farmers, or to become leaseholding farmers once a property is acquired. 1/3 is local partners and stakeholders. For example, in our context, this might be Landcare or local First Nations organisations, food co-ops, food banks. And then the other 1/3 is the Agrarian Trust Directors. So this kind of composition gives, most importantly, farmers a direct voice on the management of the Commons, so that the Commons is guided by collective farmer wisdom and, I guess, first-hand experience. But it also ties in the Commons into the local community, helping build connections to land and people that are localized. So it's kind of it's not just looking at the single farms as one ecosystem, it's looking beyond that and incorporating the relationships in the community into that. And then the local communities hold equity in natural resources and benefit from that local ownership and that control. So the aggregation of farms in each Commons allows the farmers to cooperate across their businesses, for example, with farm machinery, part-time bookkeeping, shared infrastructure, markets, aggregating products. So I find within my contacts where I am at the moment in Maria, there's actually a lot of different farms and farmers and farms and producers that we're kind of like pushing the rock up the hill in like the Sisyphus kind of manner. We're doing the same thing over and over again, where I guess if this model was somehow in place, we could be able to like share resources, tools, skills and that kind of things. It just makes sense and seems like way more efficient really, and economic in terms of how we use our time and our energy. So the role of the trust at the national level is to continue to acquire land for the various Commons and support land projects on Commons. So for example, fundraising for infrastructure on Commons properties. And then it also carries out the real estate due diligence and performs the functions to acquire land and convey it to the Commons. So the title that transferred the land from the trust to the Commons has mechanisms to prevent the land going back into the speculative market. It prevents sale of the land by the Commons through a buyback right and restricts the ability of the Commons to use the land as collateral to take on debt. The deed of transfer of land from the trust to the Commons also includes a range of reporting and other obligations on the Commons, such as baseline environmental and infrastructure asset reports that build that asset record of the Commons. The deed includes any conservation easements, farm management plans, and other property management obligations. So as you can see, it's pretty thorough in how they've kind of gone about it, quite transparent about certain things or everything, it seems, really. And then the last, there's a little bit to go. The bylaws for the Commons set out reporting requirements from the Commons to the Trust, as well as dispute resolution mechanisms. The Agrarian Trust is set up as the arbitrator for any disputes with the Commons, i.e. on the Commons board, by way of the trust members on the board. While the trust board members are not neutral, they are not stakeholders by virtue of land ownership. Among the trust board members are at least one lawyer, who must be a local lawyer. In this situation, the attorney is representing no particular party, but is representing the purpose and ideals of the trust and is a mediator between parties. So when you're looking at a model like this that has so many moving parts in terms of human beings, I think these conflict resolution mechanisms are absolutely important, because it will allow for things to be covered when certain things arises in terms of like, I guess when you're looking at personalities, they could clash, or whatever. This kind of acts as a foundation that people can go to figure out what to do when these things come up, which I find, it's really awesome. And I wish that I had something like that to do in my previous lease arrangement. So when we're talking about land acquisition, there are many creative ways to acquire land into the trust. So this is a key one that was used by the trust in the US that I've just been talking about. And that is through donations of land by retiring farmers. So retiring farmers who own land but do not have children or do not want their farms to be transitioned out of farming for other uses can donate their property to the trust and be granted life tenancy on that property. So the donating farmer continues to live on the property, the trust conveys the property to the commons, and the commons grants the long-term leases to regenerative farmers as per the trust model. There may also be tax benefits to the donating farmer, as the donation is to a charity. A really kind of interesting way of acquiring land, especially when we look at the context here because of our aging kind of like farmers. That's a big one that I think we can really touch into. So I just wanted to shoot to Michelle really quickly, because you in your example talked about another social housing in that briefing, and also I wanted to kind of see if this model, if you had any ideas about whether this model could also be looked at in terms of buying or community purchasing something like a food co-op, because this has come up in my community. The local green and the local veg shop in town is looking to sell the business, and we're trying to look at something like this to purchase that and make it a co-op model, really. So Michelle, did you have any other examples of how land can be acquired within this?
That sounds really interesting, Eliza, that idea of the purchase of the co-op. Have you spoken to Open Table about this?
No, but I definitely should.
Yes. So I think I'm right in thinking that they just did a study on localized food economies and address these kinds of questions. So that they're the guys that do the software for small scale farmers to do distribution. Do you know them?
Yeah.
Do you mean Open Food Network?
Open Food Network,
Yeah.
sorry. Open Food Network, yeah.
And Sustainable Table did a fantastic report.
Yeah.
And they were part of that, so yeah.
Yeah, right. So that sounds like that.
I'm here from Sustainable Table, but we work very closely with Open Food Network.
Yeah, okay. So I guess you guys would probably have a bit more to say about that idea of purchasing a food co-op. I don't know is the answer, but so
we're working at the moment with an organisation called Sentient, and they are an investment banker company essentially, and what we're looking to do is raise 20 to 30 million in the next 6 months to look at land acquisition, local food system infrastructure acquisition, so that we can put ownership back into communities and back into farmers, but around these sorts of things. So there's a few initiatives that we're working on around funding, but the Sentient Fund is probably the one that would be the most appropriate for this. We're looking to create something called the Farmland Trust Program, which will fall in under Sentient.
Amazing.
That sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think about the other. So I had a look and tried to get my head around how a couple of the existing commons in the States are running. And it seems like you can, I think I said in a briefing paper, you can run a CSA, there's one, and there's another farm that partially runs an education program in partnership with a local school. So I can't see why. I can't see why not. can anyone else see why not? You couldn't do that. Run a food co-op. I mean, I don't know, how would the food co-op be tied to the land though? That's the question.
Yeah, I guess it's just about taking inspiration from a model that exists like this and then applying it to a different like context. I don't know, in terms of the way that it would be purchased. I guess I'm just talking about the funding of it really, but then the running of it would be separate to that.
Yeah, I don't know. This is land. It's about land.
Yeah.
If maybe the Commons could run the business, and I don't know.
I mean, you could have like just taking inspiration. You could think about things like restraints on alienation or an asset lock. No one can sell, caps on profit, like ways to limit the kind of market speculative idea of what a business is, kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Somebody just had their hand up. Oops, that's what I wanted to do. Who was it?
Oh, I put my hand down because I can write it in the short message. All good.
Okay, cool. So this was just from the Agrarian Trust website. It just gives you a little bit more of a visual about what the model looks like and kind of the benefits. So I'll just let you have a little look over that for a minute.
So for the use case that I've drafted for the Surf Coast Energy Group, which is currently being reviewed by their committee, I suggested that the visual that you've got up has the members as individuals, but Surf Coast, it seemed to me when I was talking to Graham and looking at the history of it and the documents he'd given me, is they've already established a really amazing track record in working with other organisations in their local environment, in the Surf Coast environment, and they've built some really strong collaborations between organisations. So I suggested in that use case that in the case of the Surf Coast Commons, which is what I've called it, which is what their regional body might be called, that the members be organisations, and one of them would be the Surf Coast and the Surf Coast Energy Group. Another one would have to be Agrarian Trust, and then they could have some other partner member organisations.
Okay, so you're looking at who those people would be at that table, I guess.
Yeah, so instead of people, you've kind of got, if you think about organisations with their representatives at the table.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's have a chat to some people that are here that have been involved in this working group. So yeah, I guess what I want to just again, if somebody from the working group wants to put up their hand and speak to these questions. So what is this working group trying to achieve here, and how are you going about it? Does somebody want to just give a bit of a rundown about that?
Might let somebody else talk. I've been talking too much. Someone else who was there from the beginning.
Anybody?
Well, I think from our perspective, it's interesting what Jade was saying about Sentient for private investment, $20 to $30 million in 6 months. Is that right?
Sorry, on mute. Yeah, so the raise will begin in the next month or two, and their hope is that they'll be able to raise between 30 and 50 million in a fairly rapid amount of time, mostly through Australian private enterprise, but probably from overseas investors as well.
Jade, is that looking at like in terms of impact investment, so they're expecting some kind of return on their investment, even if part of that is a social return?
Of course, yeah. So a really broad range of debt models will be put forward, and it's completely dependent on the two parties that are brought to the table. But based on the research document that I shared just a moment ago, we want to make sure that what the funding doesn't do is tip the balance of power when you sit around the table to work out what's actually needed by the community or the farmer that we're talking to, because that traditionally is what has happened. So we'll be looking for opportunities that are kind of systems levers, really, that allow models that could be replicated to be supported, models that are kind of carrying a significant practice change example for particular sectors, like wheat, for example. There's a really strong farming family in Western Australia who are wheat and sheep producers who really do need some significant support in order to make sure they don't fall over. They would be our most significant regenerative farmers in that sector, and we need to make sure that they succeed. And so giving them support to do that work would then enable us to unlock some really complicated components to do with the wheat sector. Looking at, say, properties that are in high value but quite rare ecosystems along the East Coast to support the work that they're doing to regenerate the land through their farming practices, again, would be well supported. And all of those examples require really different debt models. So some of them are looking at components of acquisition, some of them are looking at just working capital, some of them are looking at really, really low interest for components of it, and patient capital. So you're not looking at sort of a 10% interest rate over a 3-year period, you're looking at a 2 to 3% interest rate over a 10 to 15-year period. And so we start to build a system where the finance actually speaks to the true needs of the agrarian community, because at the moment, as you guys have just said so beautifully, this is what's crippling our ability to progress the agrarian movement, is access to land, and land that is held into perpetuity in this way of thinking.
Jade, is it right that I'm thinking that it's mostly sort of through philanthropic channels or benevolence that you're kind of hoping to get that money?
Yes, and so we work predominantly with philanthropic partners. So we've got about 35 philanthropic partners right across the country, and that accumulates a collaborative funneled fund that we then push out to industry across various projects. But they're looking at things like sort of $10,000 to $200,000 projects, and we specifically look for projects that are really experimental. We talk about the 3 different horizons of investment, and as a rule, Horizon 1 is business as usual. It still continues to operate in the same paradigm of this sort of patriarchal capitalistic environment. Horizon 2 is where you start to look outside of those models for a little bit of innovation. And that's where we would like to see investors start to put a component of their portfolio. But actually, where we spend most of our time and effort is in Horizon 3, which is in absolute paradigm transition. Because and that's why we work so strongly with philanthropists, because they have a stronger understanding and a stronger inclination to put money towards cultural, community, social outcomes.
So
not just
Jade,
economic. Yes.
because I'm a bit of a newbie on all this funding stuff, so have I got it right? The philanthropics contribute money to this fund, and then you develop a portfolio of investments for the fund. Is that right?
Yes, but there's not just investments, there's also just donations. And
Right.
so there's a really broad range of models. Some of them they're not tied. So some of them, we do all the due diligence on the project, so we understand that there's a high likelihood of success, but success is pretty broad for us because we understand there's a huge amount of learnings in things that don't look like a success to the outside, but actually are, because we learn a lot from it and we can share those learnings. Yes, essentially what you're saying is spot on. We funnel money into a unified fund, and then we develop the relationships with the projects right across the country
Right.
in various ways, and then we either push them through to the impact investment fund, which is sentient. We don't have the regulatory requirements to manage an impact fund that has returns, financial returns associated with it, but we manage all the projects that don't have interest associated with them, and we're just looking for social or cultural outcomes.
Okay. And the parameters around that fund are broadly that it has to be to do with agriculture?
Yeah, so we're only looking at localized food systems and regenerative ag.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
They're really clearly outlined in our impact areas on our website, which is just sustainabletable.org.au.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'm really happy to chat with anyone too about it at another time if you feel like now's not the forum.
That's so exciting, Jade.
I should
It's exciting,
mention,
but it's sort of one step forward, two steps back. We've got a few incredibly, we call them our snowflakes, incredibly aligned funders who fully get this stuff, and they're willing to take massive risks on our farmers and our local food system. And then we've got other people who look at us like deers in headlights and cannot join the dots between climate change, or, you know, we only spend money on climate change, and the fact that our ecology and our agroecological systems are actually linked to climate change. So it's a slow journey. We're doing the best we can.
Yeah, it's just learning as you go, I guess, because I guess this kind of concept is so new here as well.
Yeah, and it's complex. So teaching them is a very steep learning curve.
I
Madison,
should say, Jade, I contacted Jim Phillipson, and he was very helpful. He's
Great.
given us or offered the opportunity to act as a trust recipient for us to park our money when we get this thing up and running.
Wonderful.
What we're mostly looking for now is someone that might be a wealthy landowner who can essentially kick it off to give it firepower and credibility with the rest of the community, using it as a carrot, if you like.
As in a wealthy landowner that owns the land already in the community that you're talking about?
A local wealthy landowner that lives nearby who might want to invest, if you like, donate his through a charitable trust arrangement, donate some money towards that land acquisition, and potentially hold it out as a carrot to the rest of the community. So let's say if there's a property that's up for sale that's 5 million at the moment, and if some money could be put up at the start, it might be just the sort of incentive that gives the rest of the community you know, the momentum to jump on board.
I definitely have a number of those, but they require fairly sensitive conversations and sometimes a pretty strong sense of established relationships. So I'm really happy to take this offline and have a bigger conversation with you about how we might structure a pitch or an introduction to those few.
Yeah, well, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep, no worries.
Thanks, guys. I think, yeah, that just through those that conversation there, like I think a couple of things that have been brought up in terms of like challenges and barriers that people are already kind of facing in trying to set something similar up like this here. Madison, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a question, particularly because there's obviously a few groups already working in this space. I'm coming to it from I'm part of the Blue Mountains Community Land Trust, which is we're setting this model up for housing. It's the same thing mostly, or it's very similar. And it's what got me interested in farmland trusts. So we're working with the Louise Crabtree Hayes and Western Sydney University, who wrote the manual on community land trusts 10 years ago, but there's still not a functioning community land trust in Australia. And so I started looking into this, like the Agrarian trust model and Kindling Farm, the ones that are the guys that are doing it in the UK, and there's some French models as well. And what I was coming across, and I'm not a lawyer or a legal person at all, but what I came across was that we one of the difficulties in Australia, and it happens as well for the housing option, is that it's difficult in Australian law to separate the land asset from the housing asset. And in this agrarian trust or farmland trust model, the farmer builds equity on the infrastructure and, carbon sequestration, soil improvement, but they don't build equity on the land itself. The commons holds the land. It's difficult. Does anyone have any more answers around how we can actually do that legally in Australia? Because they're sort of questions that people are still asking. I know we can have multiple occupancy, we can do shared equity, but it's quite a different thing to keeping an asset separate, like that, the land and the infrastructure separate, and only being able to build equity on, say, as a farmer, if I was only building on equity on the infrastructure.
So the model is a ground lease. So it's a 99-year, depending on what the jurisdiction will allow, and I'm not sure. No, Victoria allows a 99-year lease. I know because I've just done one for a retirement village up the road. So 99-year lease, ground lease, and then the ownership of the buildings is separate. So if, for example...
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, my internet's delayed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So if, for example, a commons would own the land, if there's already a house on the land, they would also own the house. And then they could lease the land at a 99-year lease to the farmer. But the ownership of the land and the ownership of the building would remain with the commons.
But are we talking about the farmers building equity on the improvements that they, like, for example, if we're getting farmers onto these commons, we also need to provide avenues for them to then be able to take out loans to go onto other land, potentially, even if that was other commons land, and they can't use it as collateral. Are they?
That's
but
right.
How are they actually building equity?
So the model for the Agrarian Trust limits the extent to which you can encumber your lease, right? So that I can't remember what the percentage is. So that's the first thing. But in terms of improvements that the farmer makes, they recoup the benefit when they transfer the lease.
Because the commons pays them out, essentially.
That's right.
Okay, all right, sorry. So that's I think the answer that I was looking for, because I was basically trying to convince some people for funding for research for
Can
this.
Can I also just throw it open to Amy and Bronwyn to make sure I got that right? Does that sound right?
Bronwyn,
Amy. You're closer to Australian property law than I am, so I'll let you.
No, well, I'm not actually particularly close to Australian property law, but I know Louise. Well, she's not a lawyer herself, but she actually knows more property law than most people. I mean, she has my understanding of it in a conversation I was in some time ago around the city of Sydney was looking at potentially developing a community land trust for social housing. And in theory, they still are. They had awarded it a prize as an innovative idea for social purpose in Sydney, and they were going to try and develop it. And the objections seemed not to be legal, but they were worried about whether there'd be acceptance from those, well, broader community acceptance, but also acceptance from the actual sort of purchasers, buyers and sellers involved in the transaction of that separation, and that it would sort of make people anxious. But that was more a sort of, it didn't seem to be an actual legal barrier. What you said, I mean, I just don't know enough. The other thing that came up in one of our earlier meetings was some concerns about the difference between the nature of a trust in the US and the nature of a trust in Australia, and that sort of the public purpose of the legal aspects of a trust weren't quite as easily built into the structure as they might be in the US. that it's much more sort of
Yeah, I think I'm concerned not concerned. It's just that it sounds like the money is there. Like if what Jade is saying, there's impact investors, there's philanthropic investors. So, but we are not at a point where we can actually articulate people aren't believing the articulation or the rationale saying yes, this will work in Australian property law because there isn't precedent.
No, there is. So just down the road from me at Westernport Gardens, which is a retirement community, the model there is precisely that. It's a 99-year lease, and the residents own, exactly that model.
It's applied to agriculture, though. There is a level of skepticism.
Yes, absolutely. That is
return simply out there. It doesn't fall to, if you want it to be held in a trust into perpetuity, then you're not looking for return.
Yes.
Jade, is it possible to have your volume any higher?
Oh, yes. Is that better if I do
better.
that?
Oh, yeah, much
look,
better.
That old trick. Just hold it to your mouth. I can do that.
Thanks.
Sorry. I think there's just apprehension. And, it just comes back to that monkey see, monkey do. Haven't seen it done before in this country, therefore I'm not confident with it, and I don't want to be the one that leads the way. Whereas when you give them examples of overseas equivalents and you show that it can be legally sound in this country, they feel more confident, but that is a really slow journey.
Yeah.
So there is definitely appetite, there's definitely capacity to fund, but it's actually melding the expectations of those that are actually doing the work on the ground and those that are providing the capital in a way where everybody comes to the table with humility. That is the complicated part.
Oh my God, I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. sorry. I've had a long day.
I'll pass it on to,
oh dear.
I'll pass it on to Katie in the meantime.
Thank you. One of the other this is a question, not an answer, but one of the other questions that we need to investigate, I think, is around planning law from the Agrarian Trust point of view, and using our little tiny farmers as an example. We've got 5 enterprises on the farm. We would love for the longer term to build in the opportunity for the farmers to live where they farm. And it'd be good to throw over to Tess for that, but it's kind of one of the, because I know that that's an important issue for her, it's kind of one of the integral things with the Agrarian Trust, but at least on a small scale, you just run immediately into planning law. So I don't know if anybody's got any comments about that, but I think that's one of the things that we have to unpack in this piece of work.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, and the same down here on the peninsula. We're in Green Wedge for a lot of the land down here. There's a 40-hectare minimum and only one dwelling. But I think we are currently, with the housing crisis, we're in a really good environment for state governments to be very positive towards housing on farmland, and that doesn't necessarily comply with current zoning laws. And the state government has recently indicated that they're going to do that they're actually prepared to override local councils on this issue. Now, the other thing to consider there is also to be creative about the social housing. So there's an example in Melbourne of a social housing project where the council owns the land, the council's leased it to the social housing provider at a peppercorn rate. The social housing provider has put basically one structure, but with multiple dwellings on the one footprint. So, you conceivably, you're thinking of that as one dwelling, but in fact, it's got shared services and it's accommodating, 4 or 5 people living reasonably independently. So those are kind of creative approaches where you can say, well, it is one dwelling, but we're housing, 6 people in it.
Yeah, it seems like there's just such a broad scope of how this could be achieved here in different like contexts, I guess. I'm just mindful of time. Is there anything pressing that anybody wants that feels like we need to talk about? I feel like this discussion needs another hour or so to cover everything. I guess we've touched on the kind of challenges that we're facing on the work that's being done now, which is the legalities and I guess the human component, dealing with humans and ideals and the kind of the barriers that exist around that. Is there anybody else who is watching? Would you like to ask any questions? Even would you like us have any questions about what we can look into as a working group, but also at AFSA about this kind of this model? And then I think what we should do is come back together and do another solidarity sesh, maybe after the working group have gotten a little bit more of the work done, figured out a few more things about what this might look like here. Does anybody have any questions or comments or pressing things that you'd like us to talk about now?
So some of the questions, sorry, who was the lady that was just asking about about building equity in the infrastructure?
It was Madison.
Madison. Some of those questions, Madison, hopefully are answered in the use case that I've done for Surf Coast Energy Group, because I pull apart the lease model with a lot more detail and start talking about resale formulas and all that kind of thing. So hopefully when that use case is shared with the working group, then some of those questions might be answered.
Cool.
Great, sounds great.
Okay, anybody else have anything that they want to bring up? Anyone from the working group?
I'm just going to mention to Jade, how do you want to stay online here on this link to have a chat?
Jade just had to jump off, she said in the chat.
Sure. Okay.
We'll
So
try.
I think she's literally just...
We'll connect up, Graham, for future.
I just had a quick question for Casey. I don't know, you may not want to go into this or it might be too detailed, but you mentioned that there were some downsides to the model from the point of view of landowners.
Yeah.
No, well, it's really just potential. No, not from the point of view of the landowners, from the point of view of whether the model will work in Australia.
Oh, okay.
And it's really just that we are at the very beginning of this exploration in Australia. And I just want to say thank you to Michelle. And I think that the approach that we're taking within the working group of doing use models, what are you calling it, Michelle? Use cases is a really good way to go, because what and then our experience with it's been that it's not until we're 5 years in and we're still just uncovering the issues that we couldn't see at the beginning. So starting point, and that's when the learning.
That's really, so I'm hoping I'll get to speak to you next, Katie. And
yeah, great.
All those issues you're talking about that have come up with your co-op agreement, and I'd love to see the co-op agreement. That'd be really good. I could
we're happy to. Awesome.
Amazing. Links that Jess is going to share might be useful for you guys moving forward that are watching and listening. So I guess another one that I found really inspiring was this Landed Farmerama podcast that it was made in 2021 or something, and I was late to the party, but it was a really amazing like it was beautifully produced, and it dives into a kind of a Scottish farmer's experience of reckoning with his assumptions about the family farm and what that constitutes, as well as the colonial history that his farm was built upon, and I guess that he had benefited from for like many, many years, and it kind of unpacks that, and it's really beautiful, and it made me think about a different way of viewing land, and it goes into the I'm having a mind blank of what it's called in the Highlands of how the commons are established there. But yeah, it's really inspiring, and I really highly recommend that. And if you wanted to have another look, these are the things that I talked about. The Agrarian Trust website is an amazing resource, and also the toolkit in terms of which is the guide to creating an agrarian trust that you can access, and it goes about how to set up something like this. Then there's the land access solutions in the agrarian commons model. That's another podcast that Michelle linked us into. And then there's a summary of 3 different agrarian commons, so different ways that properties are being run under this model as well. Little promo thing here. So if you're not a AFSA member, jump on board, get on the board the food sovereignty train with us. And also very exciting, our latest book called Eating Democracy, which we're writing in the middle of writing now. It's nearly all the authors have nearly finished being drafted up. We've just released the crowdfunding campaign. It's live today. So we're raising money to get that published, and it will be launched in October on Bridger Ewan country, which is right here where I am, just before the AFSA convergence. So it's all happening. Wow, yeah, that was a great discussion, guys. Like, there's so much, I guess, as you've said before, it's so new here, right? And so we're all learning as we go. But I think what the most important thing is that this conversation has started now, and the work is being done, and yeah, we'll start to kind of unpack all those anomalies that are existing now about what are going to be the barriers and how we can go about getting something like this going here. So I think it deserves another discussion. So yeah, you'll be hearing from me soon to try and to have a check-in to see how you're all going, and we'll do another solidarity session around this, I think, in the future.